I am here today surrounded by four amazing women who do case management here at Back Bay Mission. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. This is our roundtable discussion. What we want to share with you is really some of the gaps in services, and I think also some of the joys, right, that you experience in the work you do. So how about, who wants to go first, introduce themselves?
I'll go first. Do I look at the camera? I am Kirsten Hebron. I am the case manager for the Micah Day Center.
My name is Keyonia Carter. I am the Emergency Assistance Case Manager.
Sarah Boone, Home at Last, Permanent Supportive Housing and Outreach.
Elizabeth Sandoval, ESG Rental Assistant Case Manager.
So how about if you share just a brief bit about what you do and what your case management position involves? I just want to honor these folks because they work with individuals who are in poverty, individuals who are unsheltered or traditionally called homeless, or people experiencing homelessness, and this is incredibly challenging and yet rewarding work, and you're probably rarely thanked for the work you do, right? So thank you. How about if you start and you share just very briefly what your role entails?
Okay. We are actually in the Micah Day Center, and when we have a new guest that comes in, I meet with them and do a needs and strengths assessment survey, and that helps me to get to know them and find out what their needs are, and make referrals or help them with, say, getting food stamps, getting an ID, looking for employment. There's such a long list, and every day something new comes up, but I'm always up to the challenge to try to help them meet that need so they can eventually become self-sufficient.
My program consists of the food pantry. I also do utilities, which is lights and water. It also consists of helping people obtain their birth certificates, state IDs, and IDs for housing and employment purposes.
So my primary job is Home at Last, which is permanent supportive housing. We house chronically homeless individuals with disabilities and try to make them self-sustainable, move them forward. We also do the outreach for Harrison County, so if there's somebody that's unsheltered or in need of services that can't come to Back Bay for any reason, we go to them. And then Kirsten and I also run the Micah Day Center apprenticeship program, where we have an apprentice for a year and we teach them job skills and training and resumes, and really working through some of the kinks prior to employment.
My program is ESG Rental Assistant, so there's two components to it. We have rapid rehousing, where we house homeless people. We pay their deposits and get them in the housing. And preventive, where if you're being evicted, we will pay your arrears to keep you from becoming homeless.
Now, the work that each one of these individuals does is incredibly challenging. It brings a lot of joy and self-gratification, but there's also a lot of gaps in services. So I'd kind of like to start with the challenges first of the gaps in services. So where do you see gaps, and where are some of the biggest struggles you have serving this particular population of people that are us and we're them, right? So
Yeah. I think and Keyonia will experience this too, is individuals trying to get an ID. So, and they may need the ID for several reasons, for housing or employment. And depending on their situation, if they've never had a Mississippi ID before, then they have to start over. So they have to have a birth certificate, social security card, they have to have proof of residency. But then you hit these roadblocks because to be able to order to get the birth certificate, you have to have an ID. So to get an ID, you have to have your birth certificate. To get your birth certificate, you have to get an ID. It's like, okay, well, what do you do? So it's just kind of like you have to find those missing pieces, and hopefully you can figure that out for them. But sometimes there is a roadblock. I just had someone today who's going to go back home because there's no way he can get an ID here because he didn't ever have a Mississippi ID. And you see that also when they're released from prison, because when they're released from prison, they don't meet with anyone who tries to help them get the documents or get an ID or get the resources they need to be able to go out into society and do what they need to do. And so that in itself is another issue that comes up. And unfortunately, and I hate to, get to that point where they're not able to get it, so then they can't get employment, they can't get housing. What do they do? What are they supposed to do now? So they're kind of stuck.
They can even cash the stimulus check.
Right, and that was one of the issues that came up was when the stimulus checks came out and they needed an ID. Well, now they can't cash the stimulus check. So now they're holding it. So, yeah, it led to other things that we weren't even aware of.
I totally agree with that. I actually just had a client today. He is from East Orange, New Jersey, and he has a South Carolina ID, but he is originally from New Jersey. And so they stated that they were not able to send him, or he is not able to request a copy of his ID because he no longer lives in South Carolina. That the ID is proof of residency. So he was letting them know, I do not live in South Carolina. I would like the address to be sent elsewhere. And they was like, well, we cannot do that because your ID shows your proof of residency. So how can they provide proof of residency when they're homeless? And we were basically telling her that we do have a program over here where they can send their mail. And she was like, no, because that's not what is on his ID. So there are many stumbling blocks when it comes to them obtaining their IDs, and especially when they're getting out of prison trying to thrive. I mean, to me, that one is the most traumatizing one, because you get out and you want to do better. You want to start great things for your life. You want to start that process where you're moving into the next level, but society, again, still can be a stumbling block. And so I think, from my perspective, that before they are released from prison, at least try to help them obtain their birth certificates, social security cards, something that they can come out and start a new life with, instead of just sitting them out there with a piece of paper and saying, here you go.
Yeah, and that's how you
And-
lower recidivism.
Right.
Yeah.
And interesting, I think those of you watching this, since you're watching this, it probably means you have access to a computer, you have access to electricity, and these are just simple things. Think about getting an ID and the barriers there for getting an ID, which gives you access to everything, right? So those are huge challenges.
Every state is different. Every fee is different.
Yeah.
Texas
Yes.
is $22. My client cannot get her ID because she has none of the primary, none of the secondary. We got her face sheet and a social security card, but now they're saying you have to have this other thing. So then you go and you email the actual state, and they say, well, provide all this plus a letter plus your identification. And I'm like, well, I surely don't want to send my ID in the mail to you. I don't even know you. So it really is a difficult, and it takes months. And if we can't have an ID, we can't even put them in housing. They just stay homeless, waiting on IDs. It's crazy.
It is.